Hello, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about how you properly size a bike using the Rider Area Distance method, or RAD. This is something that I saw on Joy of Bikes, and it's also a thing that Lee Likes Bikes has also talked about, and I believe it is probably the best method on how you should fit a bike, especially after using it for a little while. And actually it got me to change the mountain bike I ride from the medium-sized Ripmo AF to now my Salsa Rustler, which I will show you here in a moment. But the first bike I'm going to talk about is my 22-inch BMX bike, because a lot of people look at a BMX bike and then see somebody like me riding it and think that the bike is too small, because they're looking at the wheel size. They're not looking at the actual measurements of what we'd like to call the cockpit, which is this area in here. So the Rider Area Distance method is an excellent method to figure out exactly how your cockpit should fit, and why it's important that we have gone in this direction, especially for mountain biking, because BMX went this direction way back in the late 80s, early 90s, and it took mountain biking many years, not until like 2010s, or even some of them not until like 2014, 2015, to start making longer frames and shorter stems to properly fit a bike better and get the front end out, the front wheel out in front of the rider more, so they're not using this long stem and way over the front. All of this applies not so much when you're seated and pedaling around, it applies when you're standing and riding on the bike, because most of the time when we're doing anything technical on a bike, we're going to be standing. And on a BMX bike, you're always standing. So this Rider Area Distance is a great way to size a bike, because you can't size bikes by the height of the frame anymore. That's just the poor way to size a bike. That used to be how they sized mountain bikes a long time ago. You had a 15-inch frame or a 16-inch frame or a 17 or 18, all the way up to like 21-inch frame, so the frame was like super tall. If you look at mountain bikes today, the frames are really low, and the sizing is done by small, medium, large, extra large, and so on, which is kind of how BMX went, except we used to go Expert, Pro, Pro XL, XL. Now, like freestyle bikes like this one, you measure by top tube length, you know, 20.5 inches, 21 inches, 22 inches, so on, whatever, right? And there's increments in between, and every bike manufacturer has different measurements and all that. So we're going to talk about this Rider Area Distance, and there's going to be two other measurements I'm going to talk about, and that's going to be the reach and the height of the handlebar from the ground, so you can see that there really isn't a whole lot of difference between this bike and my mountain bike as far as fit and sizing go. Alright, let's get into the more detailed aspect of this video. I got a tape measure and a pencil. These are the two essential things I will need. I'm using a pencil because I am in the basement and I'm going to draw on this wall, and I want to be able to clean it off the wall. So you can use anything you want, but just know that you're going to be marking on the wall. So if you use like a permanent marker or something, somebody might get angry with you that they can't get the mark off the wall. So let's get into how we measure with Rider Area Distance. And the two bikes I'm going to use in comparison are going to be my 22-inch BMX bike, 22 being the wheel size, not the frame size, and my Salsa Rustler, which is a size small with a 27.5 wheel. Alright, let's do it. So the first thing you want to do before you get into measuring your bike is you want to measure where your length is from the ground up to where you'll be holding the grips, so center of your fist. So what you do is you take a pencil and you hold it in your fist like you'd be holding a grip on a bike, right? And have the pencil sticking out on one end, maybe closer to your hand the better, or about where your grip would be. Then you want to stand close to the wall And you want to make sure that you're wearing the shoes. I have my Ride Concepts on that you would be riding your bike, at least for the most accurate measurement, because if you're not wearing shoes, you're going to be off by how much ever thickness the sole is. So you want to have the right shoes on. Then what you want to do is you want to do a little jump and plant your feet like where your pedals would naturally be. So you're in kind of the pedal stance on the bike. Then you want to take your arms and push them down with your shoulders. You do not want to be hunched like this. You want your shoulders down and in a relaxed position, and your fists down and your arms straight. Then you want to draw a little mark on the wall. One of the things that's important, keep your head upright. One of the things Alex pointed out was that if you look down at your marking, you're going to change where your pencil is. So you want to make sure you're looking forward and straight and draw that mark. Just go by feel and don't try to look at the mark. All right, so now I have a mark on the wall. Then the next step is you want to measure from the ground to that mark. And we're looking at 30.5 inches. Okay, that's your magic number that everything is gonna work off of from here. 30.5 inches is my rider area distance, doing all of the correct things. Now, how do we apply that to a bike? Let's do it. Okay, so what you're gonna want is some string, tape, rubber bands, whatever you can find. I could only find some Scotch tape or transparent tape. This is actually Scotch brand, so I can call it Scotch tape. What you'll do is you'll want to put the string on your grip and then pick like basically the center of your grip and wrap the tape around the string to hold it. And you want the center because that's roughly where your hand will go. And then you want to go to the other side and do the same thing. So I'm going to take another piece of tape, tighten the string, and then put the tape on the center. Oh boy, tape is always funny to work with. Maybe we'll go this way. And then once you get it on there, if I ever can, there we go. Now I'll show you what it looks like. It's basically the string going in between the bars. So the idea is you want to measure to the string where your hands will be in the center here for that rider area distance measurement. So once we have the string there, you basically take your tape measure and you go from center of your bottom bracket, center of your spindle, center of the rotating part of your crankset, whatever you want to call it. It's called the spindle. You go right to the center. There's a bolt here where the Allen key would go in. That's the best place to measure from, right in the center there. And then go right up to the center of that string. And boom, we're at 31.25 inches. So that is an interesting number, 31.25, and I measured me at 30.5. That means my rider area distance on my 22-inch BMX bike is a little too long, a little too much, which I'm actually surprised to find. That's kind of explaining a little bit to me, so I need to do something with this, whether it's pulling the bars back, getting lower bars, something like that, to give me that more torque. So the idea is you want, if it's longer than your reach here, right, it's harder to pull on, it's harder to control the bike and have full control over it. So I'm pretty close, but I need to do a little tweaking, and I think the only reason why I haven't really noticed it too much is it's a BMX bike, it's got a much shorter rear end, other factors that allow it to ride the way it rides. But now that I've measured, which is the first time I've actually measured this bike, I now know this is a little long for me as far as the rider area distance measurement. Now, let's measure the next measurement, which is going to be from the ground to the top of the handlebars. Now, this isn't like the best measurement, and I'll explain why. So we're at 39, roughly, inches, and the fact that this is a BMX bike, it's got a 20-inch wheel, it has no suspension, that measurement is going to be lower than on a suspension bike, because when you get on a suspension bike there's sag and the bike will sink down a little bit and things like that. But you can still use that as kind of a gauge of where you want the front end of your bike to be. The next measurement I want to measure is reach or cockpit. On a BMX bike it's a little tricky, but you need to follow the center of the steer tube of your fork, not where your handlebars are, but where your fork comes up to the top here, to the center of where your seat tube would come up if I had the seat raised way up. I could raise the seat up, but I'm just going to eyeball this for now. So I'm going to go here, find that center right from the bolt, roughly go parallel to the ground, and I'm going to go here, and it's coming to about 22.5 inch. So that would be the reach of this BMX bike. So 22.5, and then we have a 39 here, and then we have a 31.25, I believe, was my rider area distance. Okay, let's take my mountain bike and do these same measurements. Okay, here we go. I already have the string on there. I don't need to show you how to do that again. And we're going to go ahead and do the rider area distance. I kind of eyeballed it on this bike before I bought it, and I rode the bike around and it felt really good, but I'm very curious to know what it's actually going to come to now that I used a piece of string and I'm no longer eyeballing it. Center of bottom bracket. Wow, look at that. 32. That's more than I thought it would be. I did update the handlebar and update the stem and stuff, but I essentially put this handlebar in the same position that it was in, that the previous handlebar was in, because I cut down some steer tube and got a shorter stem and all this stuff, right? So I'm actually surprised that this is higher. I do remember measuring my Ripmo AF and it was more like 34. So now that I've actually done these measurements and I've ridden both of these bikes quite a bit, I feel like my Ripmo AF was like quite a bit too big for me. But I'm starting to see that this, what they call RAD plus, where this measurement is longer than my reach here, is as long as you're close, the bike will feel better. I don't think it necessarily has to be less, and this is coming from my experience of having actually ridden the bike. I believe that as long as your numbers are within an inch or so of this measurement here, you should be okay. I do want to recheck my measurement just to be sure I'm doing this correctly, because I'm a little surprised that both of my bikes that I feel really comfortable riding are RAD plus by about an inch, inch and a half or so. And yet I can manual this bike, I can pop with it, I can bunny hop it, I can do all these pretty sweet things, and you might even have seen my video of explaining what a bump jump is, which is actually quite a tricky move, and you really need to have good bike control. And I was able to manual the bike, tag the log, and bump jumped over it, no problem. So a little interesting with these numbers. This is a size small. Again, I am only 5'7", so let's double check some of these numbers and make sure that I'm doing good. But before I do that, let's do the other measurements, because I don't want to forget that. This measurement is almost 42, right? So that's almost 3 inches higher than on my BMX bike. But like I mentioned, we have sag, so when I get on the bike, this goes down to about 30%. So that's going to be almost 2 inches. So we're pretty close on where the handlebar is. as they are on my mountain bike. And then let's do the reach measurement. Let's go center of steer tube. Now that I have an actual higher post with the dropper post, I can do this, but we want to be closer to the frame, and I actually messed that up a little bit on my BMX bike as I was up here. You want to be down here by the frame. Center of the steer tube coming back parallel, just a little over 22 inches. So essentially the same as my BMX bike, really close. The cockpit between this bike and my BMX bike is sized really within like quarter inches, right? So when people tell me that my BMX bike is too small, they don't really know what they're talking about, because the cockpit of my mountain bike and the cockpit of my BMX bike are almost identical. So just because the wheel is smaller and the frame is lower and all that stuff doesn't mean the bike is smaller, because a BMX bike obviously has a much taller handlebar because everything else is lower, has smaller wheels, things like that. So there we go. Let's get into this rider area distance, because now I'm a little curious. Okay, so lots of things matter when you're doing this. So I redid the rider area distance, and my mark is considerably higher than the previous mark. So you really have to be careful. You know, I had my knees maybe more bent than they needed to be. I need to straighten up and be more, you know, straight, push my fist down and do the drawing. And I ended up making a mark here. So this stance bit is really important that you have the right posture. So now let's measure my new mark. Then I'm going to be a lot closer on my measurements that my bikes are, and that might explain why those bikes actually do feel okay to me. So now we're going to go, look at that. Just a hair of me. Oh, I found another thing going on. Because of this is a basement, the floor next to the wall is actually higher than this. So let's eyeball it from back here. Oh my goodness. 33 inches. Now it makes more sense. Thank goodness, because I was so baffled. So right here, I can actually kind of feel it with my feet. It pumps up a little bit, and a good amount, obviously an inch, right? And then I corrected my stance. So now my actual rider area distance is 33. Whew. Well, now I don't have to message Alex and tell him he's all wrong. And Lee over at Lee Likes Bikes, they are actually correct. 33 inches. And then my BMX bike was 32 something or somewhere, I don't remember. And my mountain bike was right around 32 also. So pretty spot on. So let's go back on what I said earlier a little bit, and this is why it's important when you're watching my videos or anybody's videos, especially if they're informational, that you watch the whole video to the end, because now I have to correct some of the stuff I said earlier. And you know what? Because I was doing this on the fly and how I do my YouTube channel, I'm not going to edit that stuff out. So people that watch it and then they stop watching at that point, they're just going to be misinformed. All right. So to correct what I said earlier, this rider area distance is actually spot on. I am actually rad minus by about an inch, roughly, somewhere in there, half inch on both of my bikes. And that explains why they ride so good for me, and why the Salsa is a way better riding bike than my Ritmo AF, which was more like a 34 rider area distance, which makes sense. Now that was +1 for me. So when I measure other bikes, like my 20-inch bike, I know that's going to be a shorter distance because everything's shorter on that bike. Shorter top tube, you know, the handlebars I think are about ½ inch lower, all that stuff. And it also explains why my 20-inch bike is way easier to just pull up and throw out of control. And I've talked a little bit about that in my video about getting into BMX. About kind of if you jump from a bigger bike to a smaller bike, expect this kind of crazy, squirrely, wicked feeling on a 20-inch BMX bike, because that's the experience you will have. So don't jump on a 20-inch and start trying to throw off tricks until you take some time to get used to it, right? So there we go, rider area distance. So there's RAD plus, RAD minus. What that means is RAD plus is your measurement on your bike is more than your measurement of your body with this stance method, right? And RAD minus or RAD neutral would be exact. You're right on the spot of it. My bikes were set up at 33 inches. And you can go RAD minus, which is where you want to be. You want to be neutral or minus. And that number gives you better control of your bike while standing. This has nothing to do with how your bike rides when you're seated. It has all to do with what your bike rides like when you're standing. While you're standing and riding, your body position, you're not reaching way out there where you have to pull extra hard and extra more because you're out of reach of where your arms can actually go and where your muscles can contract and really get that strength. Your strength is going to be more in here, not way out here, right? So that's what it's really all about. It's like you need to have that leverage, that strength over your bike. That's what rider area distance is all about. Those other measurements on the bike are about the cockpit size. Technically, if I was seated on my BMX bike, it would be the exact same as being seated on my mountain bike. The reach in the seated position is when you're seated, and reaching and how much you're leaned over when you're seated. And again, you don't want to be way hunched over. And when you're standing, you don't want to be way over the front wheel. You don't want a long stem on your bike that puts you way over the front wheel, things like that. You want a short stem, you want that front wheel to be out in front of you, things like that. All right, cool. So those that have watched up to this point have learned a little bit about this process and about mistakes you can make, because I made a little bit of a mistake not taking floor factors, not having a straight enough stance, and so on and so forth to do this measurement. So that's really important on how you do this measurement. So I hope you really like watching my channel. I appreciate your support because it's been awesome so far. Please like and subscribe. If you like my content, just hit that subscribe button because it helps me out, it'll help you out, it'll bring my channel up more often in your feed, things like that. And so, yeah, I guess that's my argument for hitting the subscribe button. I'm not all about the bell. A lot of channels, they tell you about the bell. I don't really, if you want a notification when my videos are uploaded, hit the bell. If you don't worry. I don't use the bell on any channels. I just go look at my feed every day or every now and then and see who's been updating and stuff. So that's your choice. But subscribe definitely puts me in that feed. Anyway, peace.